Today we are at West Bay with the objective of walking all the way along the coast here to Hive Beach. West Bay you may recognise as the location of the TV drama series Broadchurch. We're going to walk all the way to the other end of those cliffs, second set of cliffs, all the way along there. So walking in front of these cliffs does pose certain potential hazards. These cliffs are in a progressive state of collapse. This weathered bit up here is going to come down fairly soon. You can see a big crack in the face of the cliff. See up there, you can see there are big fissures, been carved by water. Probably the course of water maybe originally started as rabbit burrows up at the top, and then water flowed into them and found its way down. But at some point in the fairly near future, this big chunk of cliff here is just going to carve itself off and fall down, much as has happened along there. The trick is not to be underneath it when that happens. So this line of flat rocks here, whilst they look like a perfect place to sit and have a picnic, actually not a good place to sit at all. So our objective today is to walk along and enjoy the scenic cliffs here, walking as close to the tide line as we can. The tide is still falling at the moment. And then the same deal along the front of the cliffs there at Hive Beach. You can actually see evidence of a lot more cliff falls on that set of cliffs. So I've timed our visit so that low tide is when we get to that second set of cliffs, which gives us the maximum clearance from the cliff face. So here's the remains of a recent cliff fall. The greatest risk from these cliff falls is probably when it's stormy weather, when there's water seeping into the rocks at the top, softening the sand and clay that's binding this all together. And also, of course, when the waves are beating against this. If there's a storm and the waves are smashing against the cliff, that vibration can be the thing that tips off a cliff fall. But just to put this in some kind of perspective, so what's happened here is a great big piece of the cliff has fallen down. That there is a chunk of rock, sort of loose soft sandstone, that is probably the size of a bus, and that's come down in one great big piece. These boulders here we go, size 10 boot for scale. So all of this stuff came down in one go, probably in fairly a short space of time. So you wouldn't want to be underneath that when that happens. We were here the other day just doing a recce, just to figure out the kind of potential safety, and there were some people poking around in that little cave there and in these cracks. The most unsafe pieces are the more weathered bits. Those are the pieces that have stood for the longest, so it's kind of their turn to fall down sometime. Yeah, so looking at this piece here, all these ledges here are the harder bits of sandstone sticking out that haven't been weathered away by the sea and the wind. There is an undercut here, and there is a big crack going up there. I will do a freeze frame and highlight that crack. So this big piece here is just going to fall off at some point, so I'm not going to stand here waiting for that to happen. I mentioned in the little recce segment in the previous video that Bridport behind us is on the River Brit, and West Bay is the mouth of the River Brit. But whereas a lot of British towns on rivers are named after the river, so for example, if you trace the River Exe up from Exmouth, you go past places like Exton, Exminster, Exbridge, Exford. So where there was a minster, where there was a church, bridge, where there was a bridge, ford, where there was a ford. And a lot of towns and villages are named after the river that they sit upon. Bridport sits upon the River Brit, and so you would think the town is named after the river, but not so. And to explain actually what's going on there, we need to get to this little bit here between the two sets of cliffs. So I'll resume this story when we get there. Again, just looking up at these pieces here, you can see big vertical cracks in the cliff face. So at some point pieces just cleave off and become part of the beach. So there's another fairly recent rockfall here, I would say. Just looking at the sharp angles on those rocks and the fact that there's fine sediments on top of there that haven't washed away. So that's only been there for a few tides, that rockfall. So our walk today is going to take us along in front of these cliffs. We're nearly past the end of the West Bay cliffs now. And then in front of that second set of cliffs there, where I think there might be some fossils to be found. Round the corner to Hive Beach, where we're going to stop for fish and chips. And then we'll make our way back inland on the coast path. So if we have to stop somewhere, it will be one of these places where there's been a cliff fall here. The cliff is kind of reclining, and so the angle of the cliff here is kind of in repose. A big piece has fallen off of here sometime in the last few years, and so that piece is not so likely to fall as these pieces. But the chances of any of that actually while we're here, very small. You know, there are 3 or 4 cliff falls per year, major cliff falls per year here, and they mostly happen when there's a storm blowing, when there's wind, rain, all that sort of thing. Now there are some fascinating little sea caves here, carved out by the waves bashing against these rocks, and the waves do come right up to the cliff face. You can see the rocks there have been kind of worn smooth on that ledge there. So at high tide, the waves beat against the cliff, and indeed I think that white stuff there is just salt that's seeped out of from where the sea has soaked into the cliffs and then seeped back out and dried up. So that's sea salt crystallizing on the cliffs there. What a glorious day. It's early March and it is a superb day. Piercingly blue sky. Doggo's having a great time digging holes and barking at rocks. And it's just very lovely to be out here. So if we look up the hill there, you can see the old coast path has been kind of fenced off, and presumably there's a newer coast path a little bit further inland. These cliffs are receding back into the landscape as they're worn away and they become the beach. The cliff face itself is receding inland. So here, in rather less time than I anticipated actually, we're nearly at the midpoint of our walk. We'll probably stop and have a little break. So there's a place here called Freshwater Bay Holiday Park, I think, something like that, and it's on the River Bride. Now, why would there be a River Brit and a River Bride so close together? Well, it's here where I need to consult my notes, because I did a little bit of research on this, and bear in mind, some of my pronunciations here are going to be my best effort, but they're not going to be particularly faithful to the reality of the thing. So up here is a river called the River Bride. So time to consult my notes, and I'll just read back to you what I researched while we were preparing for this walk. As I say, many towns and villages in Britain are named for the river that runs through or beside them. Bridport, which sits on the River Brit, is an exception to that general rule. A little over a mile southwest of the mouth of the River Brit, which is all the way back there at West Bay, and which is where we're now heading, there's another river with a similar name, the River Bride. It's recorded in the Domesday Book as Aqua de Bridi, which probably was named from the Old Welsh Bridi, or the Cornish Celtic Bridion, meaning to boil or to gush. So presumably there's some point in the river where it either used to or still does kind of bubble and gush. And that little river, the River Bridi, or Bridi, lends its name to the villages of Little Brady, which may formerly have been a fortified settlement named Bridion, and Long Brady, or Langa Brida, as it would have been said in earlier times. So sometime after this river and the towns here were named Bridi, but still well over 1,000 years ago, another town, Bride Town, actually probably Bridi Town or Briditon, sprang up. A market town, also referred to as Bridport or Bridport, port being an old word for market, in addition to its more commonly known sense in describing seaports. So Brideport may never have actually been pronounced Brideport. It might have been Bridport. The long I sound in the River Bride and Bride Town is a fairly modern thing. So it may have originally been something like Briditon and Bridport. You'd have to ask Simon Roper for the correct pronunciation. But over time that became Bridport. So the town Bridport, which is way back there, north of West Bay, is named because it was near the River Bride, or the River Bridi, and so it was Bridi Town, or Bridport. And the river that was running through Bridport at that time was called the River Wooth, but has been renamed the River Brit because it ran through the town of Bridport. So somewhat unusually, the river is named after the town. It's usually the other way around. This looks like a sort of place where people would sit and eat their sandwiches. These ledges here look like they might be man-made, but these are actually just the sedimentary strata being exposed. So anyway, as I say, yes, so Bridport is named Bridport because it was near the River Bride or Bridi, and that has a history that goes back thousands of years. But the name Bridport may only go back 1500 years or so. So that's the interesting story of the River Brit, the River Bride. I hope I got some of that right anyway. And Bridport and Bredion. Now I don't know whether we're going to have to go inland to cross the River Bride, or whether it's one of these rivers that runs into the beach and disappears into the gravel. We'll see when we get there. But it's at the end of this bank here. So there's a little beach up there, and somewhere beyond that bank is freshwater something holiday park. So this little bit of beach here, there are no footprints apart from Eva's footprints up there. There's some human footprints a bit further on. So we just walked along a little bit of beach where we're the first humans to walk along here, the first people to walk along here since the last high tide. So yeah, that's Freshwater Sands Holiday Park. And as I say, the cliffs here are gradually receding into the land. So these cliffs here, I mean, at the time when I've just been describing, when there was a place here called Bredion and all of that stuff, the cliffs you're looking at in front of you here might have actually just been a hill, and there might have been the sea somewhere over there. These are just hills that the sea happens to be carving into. So if you go inland here, you see many more of these sandstone hills that are intact, and they were often Iron Age settlements, because back in the Iron Age here, a sensible way to defend yourself was build a fortified town or fortified camp on top of a hill, on top of a steep hill, so that if your enemies came and attacked you, by the time they came up to where you are, they're exhausted from climbing the hill. So a lot of these things here would probably, well, you can see all the way along. So you can see down there to Golden Cap. There would have been Iron Age settlements on top of many of these hills. Chunk of rock here with some fossils in it. That looks like it might be the remains of a belemnite or something. Other bits there might be shells. Actually, it might be something else actually. More little bits of something there. Possibly pieces of belemnite or something. But yeah, these cliffs up ahead, slightly different formation. Supposedly some nice fossils in here, but I keep on saying that in videos and then coming home either empty-handed or with some poor specimens. We'll see what we find, shall we? So there's quite a lot of water running out of the beach here. Now I don't know whether this is just from seawater that's soaked into the beach at the last high tide, or whether it's coming directly through this sand from the River Bride. The mouth of the River Bride should be up ahead of us. So here you go, a sandy beach. I'm visiting a sandy beach, and actually the sand here is definitely the kind of thing that you could make sandcastles from. It's a little bit coarse still, but it is definitely sand. Haven't seen very many shells. I'm sure they must be out there, but the waves do crash against this coast, so shells probably just don't last very long on the beach once they're empty. There, for example, is a piece of a slipper limpet shell. I can recognise what that is because I've seen these before worn down at West Wittering. So that's the thickest part of a slipper limpet shell, which is all that's left after it's been tumbled in the surf for a time, is this beautifully smooth, polished, little white, pure white nugget. It glistens in the sun. Quite pretty. Nearing the cliffs that will take us round to Hive Beach, I can see water coming down the beach, and this is the River Bride, or the mouth of the River Bride. So, you know, if we were going to predict things based on names, this place probably ought to be called Bridemouth or Bridimouth, but it's not a rule, it's more of a guideline. So here we are, the River Bride, or the River Brit. I don't think we can ford that. I think we may have to go inland and find a way across that. And although we're not seeing this as it would have exactly looked back to our ancestors 2, 3, 4, 10,000 years ago when this was named, it probably, the mouth of the river might have been down there somewhere. It is gushing and boiling, and so it earns its name. So we're gonna have to walk up there, cross the river up there somewhere, and then come back down the beach here. So when the tide comes in, which it will do all the way up to more or less where we're standing now, the mouth of the river will be up there somewhere, and all of this sand and sediment will be rebuilt, and then when the tide falls again, it will carve out a new channel, probably in pretty much the same place. But it would be interesting to spend a week here and just have a look and see, because often it's the case that these rivers that go through the beach here are different every day. So this is, as I say, this is the River Brit. This is the river that Bridport, a town somewhere else, was named for. I don't think you'd better go in there. Oh, well, there's no bank here, so I think we're going to have to get up on top of this thing and walk along. Yeah, we looked at maybe crossing down there at the shore where the river just fans out across the gravel, but because there's water flowing through the gravel's really loose, and I got like 2 steps into the water and my boots were nearly up over the top. I haven't got wet feet yet, but I think trying to cross it there would be a recipe for wet feet. Probably the right way to do that would be take shoes and socks off, ford the river, put dry shoes and socks back on at the other side. But we'll go for an alternative route. So we're going to go up here, get on top of this bank of gravel here, and then cross the river inland a little bit, then come back down to the beach. Okay, so that's the holiday park. We're just going to go up here, cross the river somewhere. Hopefully there'll be a little bridge up there, and then back down to the beach and walk the rest of the coast. For scale, that's a person standing on top of that cliff. Probably about 2 or 3 pixels on the camera. Right, so we had to walk a fair bit inland, and it's a proper river here. But there is a footpath here that skirts the river, and I think just around the next bend there is a bridge. So yep, public footpath sign. And it looks like we follow the little road bit here. This is a camp or caravan site. Pitch numbers painted on the ground. Electricity hookups for those that Want to get away from it all, but also bring it with them. And up over there is the village of Bradstock, which we won't be going as far as today. We're only going as far as the bridge here, which I think might be just in this corner of the field here, actually. I hope. Maybe. I see some sort of signage there. No, it might just be another hookup. Okay, well, we'll find the the footpath goes off over there somewhere. It might be that we have to go all the way up to the road to get to the bridge across this river. Maybe we should have taken our shoes and socks off and forded it on the beach next time. Okay, we go this way. Coast path, West Bay. That's interesting. Oh, that's pointing back the way we came. Burton, coast path, Bradstock and Burton Beach this way. That looks like a bridge over there. So this is a public footpath. There are lots of these in Britain. A veritable network of footpaths that, even though this land is privately owned, there is a public right of way across it, which is probably quite ancient. Okay, well here we go. We are about to cross the River Bride, or the River Briddy. Very tall reeds here. I imagine those would have been cut for thatch in years gone by. It's an old iron hoop off a cartwheel. A kissing gate. Presumably there was a cottage here or something. Well, actually, it might be a military structure, just looking at the fact that it had a concrete floor. Okay, now we follow the path back down to the beach and in front of the other set of cliffs. Just looking at the banks here, this does look like it's a dike of some sort. Looks like maybe there might have been an Iron Age settlement on top of here. Just the kind of terracing and the fact that there are steep banks and then dips. Probably Iron Age fortifications. So back down the other side of the River Briddy. Now you might think it's a bit strange me calling it the River Briddy, but I believe there are still locals who refer to this river and the towns along it, the Long Breddy and Little Breddy, as Little Briddy. I believe that pronunciation has survived in the indigenous population right the way up to present day. Correct me if I'm wrong, locals. I'm not a local. I'm a relative newcomer to this area, but I think I heard somebody tell me that Long Brady is still pronounced Long Briddy by some of the locals. Let me know in the comments if you know that to be true or otherwise. So we will be coming back on part of this path because it was our intention to walk inland on the way back. So we'll be coming back over the top of this hill. We'll probably have to go back down there to cross the river, especially as it'll be rising tide at that point. We're not going to come back along the beach. So another kissing gate here and a footpath sign. It looks like there's a path that goes up the hill there. That's the way we're going to be coming back, but there's also a path I think that goes down to the beach from here. So this is where we were trying to get to, crossing the river. There's a danger sign here always a good idea to just have a look at the signs when you enter a place, just to see what the things are to look out for. So there we go, caution, steep and crumbling cliffs, keep well clear of the edge. So that's a sign mainly for people going up the cliff there, not to go and perch on the very edge of the cliff to get your grams. That looks like a cormorant up there on top of the cliff, sunning itself. I believe it could be. Anyway, we're not going up there for now. We're going down here somewhere. So I think this path will take us back down onto the opposite bank, this ledge down here. Let's just have a look. Yep, looks promising. So a bit of a detour. That was an extra 20 minutes on our journey, which I didn't plan for, because I thought we might be able to ford the river at the beach. I think we probably could have done if we tried hard enough. So that's put an extra 20 minutes on our journey, but we're still ahead of the tide. Actually, we set off a little bit earlier than we planned to, just because we started preparing stuff at home, getting our bag together, getting all the camera gear and drinks and whatnot for the journey. And of course Eva got wind that something was happening and was too excited to just sit and wait for the proper departure time. So here we are. Well, you might fall in, Eva. She can swim, but she doesn't like to. So yeah, that's where we were just a minute ago, and that was a 20-minute detour just to just to get the other side of the about 6 foot of water. Next time we'll bring a small towel, I think, and we'll just cross it there. Boots and socks off down there, cross it down there, and done. Anyway, we're back on the beach and back on track. Now it's time to go around here. And yeah, you can see actually the tide has exposed quite a lot more of the beach here, but you can also see that these cliffs are even more crumbly and fally than the West Bay cliffs. Eva still has plenty of energy for diggings and barking and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, these cliffs here, different formation. You can see it's a slightly different colour of stone. I'm told there are ammonite fossils here to be found. Will we find one today? Who knows? So couldn't come to this part of the Dorset Jurassic Coast without picking up a piece of Lime Bay agate or something like that. Here is actually a piece of what I believe to be carnelian or something similar. See the sunshine coming through that translucent stone. Some species of quartz, possibly carnelian, possibly just chalcedony. Anyway, off we go. So bye-bye to the River Brit, and off around this headland. So those layers of rock there were not exposed when we set off. We couldn't see those. The tide has fallen and exposed that little shelf there, which should hopefully enable us to get safe passage around the corner without getting too close to the cliffs. A risk which I know I'm probably labouring rather too much, but I feel like I'm a little bit sensitised by Our visit the other day, when we came to do the recce visit, there were so many people just sitting on these convenient ledges at the foot of the cliff, eating their picnics. There's a fairly recent rockfall here. What we're seeing here exposed is the same strata that we see at Lyme Regis. So this stuff might be the blue lias. So we might expect to see some fossils in amongst all of this. These layers here. I commented on this before. It almost seems like it's a paved road here, but this is limestone that's cracked after it was formed, probably just by the various bending and flexing forces that might have happened over long periods of time. It's broken it up into blocks. I see a particularly nice piece of Lyme Bay agate down there. I'm just going to wait for the waves to recede and grab that so I can show you. So there we go, very nice piece of Lyme Bay agate. Rather surprising absence of limpets on these rocks, or indeed anything on these rocks. There's no seaweed or algae or anything. The fact that there's no algae here is why there are no limpets here, because that's what they eat. But it is quite surprising. I mean, it's a bit further down here, there's some seaweed further down here. I think that might be a species of dulse. I'm no good at seaweeds, so don't ask me. But I'm not going to walk too far across the bit that's covered with seaweed because that'll be slippy. Oh, you're having a little paddle. Ah, cooling your little feet off. Yeah, the rock's getting a little bit slippy now, so I'm going to head back up onto the next ledge up. Oh, there's some limpets. There we go. Must be just a bit too high up here. Maybe it's too... maybe it doesn't get long enough inundation here for seaweed and algae to grow. Leave it. Right, now I recognise the undercut on that cliff up there. That's the one we looked at from the other side when we were at Hive Beach the other day. So that's... I recognise that that's the spot where we're going to turn and go inland. I think we probably want to be on that bit really, don't we? Oh, we were okay out here actually, aren't we? Just be careful of your footing on these rocks. I must show you this limpet. What a specimen. Look at that. Hand for scale. And the limpet's shell is contoured to fit that particular little cavity on the rock there. And the limpet will have worn that cavity away a little bit as well. So every time it comes here, it'll kind of grind down into this quite soft limestone. And over time, the limpet's shell and the cavity in the rock become a perfect fit for one another. And so that's where that limpet will come back to every time there's a low tide. You know, everybody needs a home, don't they? And here we've got a rock that's been massacred by shellfish. These are little bivalve mollusks that live in soft rock and grind their way into the rock. They're called boring piddocks. Which sounds kind of a rude thing to call anything really. Ah, well, here are the limpets. Whole little villages of them. Don't see any fossils yet, but I think I'd probably have to be digging about in this stuff up here. There is a different layer of rock here, so these look like they might have been concretions of some sort in this rock, and possibly related to formation of fossil. I can see some pyrite nodules in there, quite rusted. Oh, I can see, there we go. So we got belemnites, lots and lots of belemnites, quite well embedded in the rock. It looks like the rock might be as hard as the belemnites here. What are you doing in the water? You don't like water? Okay. Maybe you do like water. That told me, didn't it? That seaweed there, that looks like kelp or oarweed. I think I'm right in saying what that is. That's interesting to find that here. On, you know, this far up the shore, that is. I'm sure there's plenty of it down there. Are you right? It's not too slippy, is it?
No, I'm just trying to avoid it.
Yeah, just don't tread on the weed.
Yeah, I should be able to as well.
Yeah. So I'll have a little rummage around here in amongst these boulders to see if there's any fossils that have weathered out. There's a nodule. Looks like it. Oh, there's a little shrimpy thing there. But that's a nodule that's one of those kind of rusty coloured things that we saw in the other rocks. And indeed, you can see these rocks are full of fossils. So here we go. All sorts of jumbled up bivalve shells here, belemnites. Haven't seen any ammonites yet, but you know, they'll be here somewhere. The rocks here, the actual matrix rock here seems a little bit hard for the fossils to weather out as intact specimens. This here is obviously a fossil of something interesting, presumably the lower half of a bivalve. There's a piece of a belemnite there next to it. Lots of other bits and pieces in there. Interesting tubular shape there. I wonder if that's the end of an ammonite. So there is a piece of cliff up there, but you can just see that is ripe for falling down. That big chunk up there is a great big fissure right down the face of the cliff. That piece will come off at some point in the next month or two. Hopefully not today when we're walking past. Here's what's almost certainly half an oyster shell. So that's a fossil that could be excavated. You could cut that piece out and retrieve that fossil. Probably lots of other things in there as well. You tend to find rocks containing a lot of fossils where I think things were just all jumbled together and then they fossilized. Interesting formations here. I think that might have been an example of something called Liesegang lines. Or something similar to that. Actually not that easy to walk on this bit of beach because the gravel slopes quite sharply down to these rocks. Well, it goes back along there. So it's actually not very comfortable to walk along. We've got a great view of the West Bay cliffs here though, look. So I'm not seeing any shells or any fossils weathered out loose on the beach. I don't think that's that they've been picked over. I think it's just that this bit of coast here must get quite a lashing from the sea, as evidenced by the fact that these rocks are all very rounded, but also the pebbles on the beach are all very small and very smooth. So I think this just gets beaten and thrashed by the surf, and anything as soft as a fossil or a seashell is pounded down to sand in a fairly short space of time. So the only fossils we're actually seeing is the ones that have been exposed on the surface of the rocks as they're gradually worn away. Quite majestic cliffs though. And there's an enormous overhang here, which we'll have a look at a bit closer when we get there. When I say close, I don't mean underneath. Back onto this limestone pavement now. Just keeping my eyes open for anything down here. But I think we've got to go further west for the really good fossils. There is a fossil in the rock there of some sort. You can't pick that up, it's too big. It's a big rock.
I'm just trying to figure out what it is.
Yeah, I think she's not sure whether to be scared of it or bark at it, or both. You're very brave, well done. It's quite weird walking across this lumpy limestone with puddles all over it, but it's actually easier than walking on the steep slope of gravel. It's such fine gravel and it's at such an incline that walking along it just feels like you need one leg longer than the other. But we shall have to get back onto it in a minute because we run out of this stuff. And walking further up on the beach would be easier because it's a bit more level up there. But this is really not a great place to get underneath the cliffs. Fascinating though to be able to see all of the strata here laid down over the course of millions of years. And so we've got layers of different kinds of sediments, but really periodic, as if there was a period when it was mudstone, and then there was a period when there was lots of sand, and then another period when it was mudstones again. Very repetitive. We've seen things like this at Quantock's Head, and Kimmeridge was another one, and of course it is the same formations. This was the bed of a shallow sea a very, very long time ago. We're coming up onto Hive Beach now. This is where we were the other day in the video from last week or so. We walked along that bit of coast there in front of those grey cliffs, and we looked this way, but we couldn't get along this way because the tide was in at that point. There are some phenomenal undercuts on this cliff here. I'll try and get in line with it a little bit further on so we can actually appreciate the magnitude of it. I'm not going to go and stand underneath it, although ironically the size of the undercuts here may indicate that it's even less likely to fall down than some of the other bits, because this probably just indicates that this chunk of sandstone here is stronger and got greater integrity than some of the other bits, or else it would have fallen down. So it's been able to be undercut rather than just crumbling down, although, you know, that also does happen. The dark orange spots over there are iron ore of some sort, possibly converted sulfides, oxidized sulfides, so pyrites and things like that, that have then rusted into oxides. But yeah, there's quite a lot of iron in this soil. I mean, iron is probably also responsible for the yellow colour of the sand, and certainly the red-brown colour of the topsoil up there. This piece here has done its falling over, and it looks like has that slid out or has that toppled over? It looks like that slid down, so it's still the right way up. So since this bit here has done its falling down, I'm going to go over and stand here in the relative safety of this little chunk here, and we'll have a look along and see if we can get a decent view of the undercuts on this cliff. There we go. If I move around, you'll get a better view of it actually, because you can see there's a background there, but there's a fierce undercut there. Must be 2 or 3 meters undercut. And the same sort of thing when we look along that way. That undercut there is in fact the one we saw from the other end at Hive Beach when we were there the other day. That's interesting. Almost looks like the outline of bone there, but it's more likely pyrite nodules of some sort. Tell me what you think in the comments. There are, along this coast, found ichthyosaur skeletons. So the idea of finding dino bones in these rocks is not far-fetched. I'm not sure we're in the right strata for it though. I think we need to be in the lower ones, in the grey stuff. There we go, Hive Beach. This is very familiar. Seems like only last week we were here. It was last week. So we're gonna see if we can get some fish and chips in the beach cafe, and then wander back across the top of the cliffs inland on the coast path. So that was good. We got here just in time for the last orders at lunch. Got here just before 3 o'clock. Managed to order fish and chips. We both had hake and chips, and it was a very generous portion and rather delicious. Now we need to walk back, but we're going over the top. So this path up here is not an official footpath. This is a permissive path. It's actually a path up to a restaurant that's on the cliff top up here, but the landowners have permitted people to use this as a path up onto the cliff top. So it says the land beyond this sign, registered at HM Land Registry, does not belong to the National Trust. The owner currently permits public access, but permission may be withdrawn at any time. The owner does not intend to dedicate any right of way to the public. So it's just one of those things where they've decided it's okay for people to walk across here, but they don't want to allow that access to establish a right of way. So yeah, there would have been a coast path across the cliff top outside of this property at one point, but the cliff has gone. That's the remnants of the old coast path there. So there's the restaurant and bar and tea rooms, and I think that's the Coast Guard's cottage or Coast Watch cottage or something, but we need to go that way. So earlier in the video when I was talking about the fact that these cliffs that we see cut in half by the sea were originally just big hills. Here are some examples of those further inland. So you can see there's a big sort of conical hill over there, and all of these hills, the tops of them, would have been prime locations for Iron Age hill forts. So this edge here, that is the edge of the cliff. I'm not going to go any closer than this. I do sometimes wonder if, when they move the coast path in like this, so this is the coastal footpath now, I wonder if we're carving a rut here that allows water to penetrate into the soil and into the rock, and I wonder if we're actually defining the next point where the cliffs will crumble off, and then they'll have to move the footpath in there somewhere. So these dry stone walls here are quite modern, or at least they've been rebuilt quite recently. This one here is maybe a little bit older, not that much older, but beyond them there's an earthen bank. In fact, it looks like a system of dikes that goes round across there. That earthen bank there, I think, is almost certainly an Iron Age feature. There was probably a hill fort here. That bank there might have had a wooden palisade on top of it as a defensive structure. And so the settlement on the top here would have been enclosed by a high bank and a wooden palisade on top, or something like that, so that if you were trying to attack the settlement, you'd have had to climb up a bank and then climb over a fence at the top of the bank. Meanwhile, people on the inside of the fence are hurling big rocks down at you. There is also a big like, almost looks like a barrow down there, like a burial mound, perhaps. May not be. That might be a modern spoil heap from something or other. Now, of course, not all of the hill that was here in Iron Age times is here now, because the cliff face is just over there. So whatever this was is probably mostly gone, falling into the sea now. That's just the cliff edge right there. Okay, right, from right here up on the top of this hill, we've got a fantastic view of all sorts of things. So Burton Bradstock over that way, but over there in the distance I can see Colmer's Hill that we climbed up in a video year before last, I think it was. A very picturesque, almost perfectly conical hill that's in between Bridport and Seatown. Also from up here we can see the start of Chesil Beach down there, looping round and disappearing into the haze. So yeah, that's Hive Beach down there, and at the end of the cliffs you can see the beginning of Chesil Beach. And as we just crest this hill, we see those are the West Bay cliffs over there. So that's where we walked on the way out. In fact, that's West Bay Harbour down there, sticking out into the sea. So we're going back across the top of those cliffs, but first we've got to go down into this valley. There's the holiday park that we saw, and in a minute we'll see the River Bride. So we're quite a way up here, and there's quite a picturesque view of the West Bay cliffs. So now we've got to go down this rather steep bank here, down to that gate inland until we get back to the bridge somewhere over there, and then back along the beach and then back up the hill there. Now I think I can actually see our footprints on the beach down there. I think I can see the line of our, yeah, I can see where we turned around actually and went back up. Amazing. Quite a steep hill. I think sometimes walking down a hill like this, it feels harder on the legs than walking up. But this is quite an incline here. I don't really want to be walking on the mud. Just going to stop for a moment to admire the exposed grain on this bench here. How about that? I imagine that wasn't all furrowed like that when that was first installed here. That's weathered, and the weather has raised the grain and eroded away. And of course, probably successive bottoms sitting on this have also worn away the softer parts of the wood. But with the grazing angle of the sun just catching on it like this, we can really appreciate the texture of the grain. Anyway, onward. I think it would be quite fun to get here one time as the tide is falling, to just watch this river carving its own channel again, because I'm pretty sure what happens is when the tide comes in, a lot of this gravel and stuff gets washed back into this bank here, blocks the river probably forms a big pool here, and then when the tide falls, the river resumes flowing and carves itself a channel down to the sea again. Probably a different channel every time, as I say. It would be interesting to watch that happening. Perhaps we'll come here sometime and set up a time lapse. So we're back at the bridge again over the River Bride, and we noted this iron wheel hoop here on the way, and it looks like that's the other one down there. Pretty sure that that building there was probably a military building. There was a series of concrete pads along there that looked like about the right size for bunkhouses. So I don't know, but this is an old, very thick metal rim off a wheel of some sort, I think. Interesting. Anyway, back through the campsite, and I think we have to go up behind the hill, because I think the coast path that goes up the cliff face is actually, part of it's disappeared. So yeah, we think that that path, well, on the map, that path that goes up the cliff side there just kind of peters out. So I think probably, whilst we can see a track going up the hill there, I think it's probably too close to the cliff edge, and parts of that path are probably falling into the sea already. So we're following a public footpath along here. In fact, I can show you that on the footpath app. This is us following a public footpath that goes up the perimeter of this campsite, joins back on to one of the paths up here, and then up the hill and over the back of that hill. So inside the Freshwater Beach Holiday Park, I can see the next footpath sign down there on the wall. Which should take us up the roadway inside the campsite, and then there should be a footpath off to the left. There's a variety of privately owned, leased and time-shared places here. There's a rabbit underneath that one. Right, I see a sign up there on that lamppost saying Coastal Path left. It actually says coast path diversion. So yeah, this has been, the path has been diverted inland because of the cliffs collapsing. So we have to cross a golf course now. Just read this: public notice, temporary closure of footpath. Oh, it's all 2024 until June 26. Oh, that's the right. So that's the path that's been closed down here, which is the one that went along the top of the cliffs. This is the diversion we're on here. Lots of signs warning us sternly not to divert off this. This is the public footpath. It's through here. That's part of the golf course. So lots of signs saying keep on the path. We are crossing private property after all, so we don't wander anywhere here. Now this is the hill here that we looked at earlier from a bit further away. And remember how I said these hills would have been popular for hill forts? I think I see on the left hand side of this hill the remains of fortifications there. If you can see in the line of the hillside where there's a kind of steep bank and then a level bit and another steep bank and a level bit, I think that's the remains of a dike system that would have encircled the encampment or the settlement or the fort on top of that hill. You're looking at a zoomed in view, but yeah, I think we're looking at there the remains of an Iron Age dike system for a hill fort that was on top of this big hill off in the distance there. Absolutely stupendous view from up here. So Colmers Hill in the distance over there, the town of Bridport down there. West Bay is just beyond the brow of this hill. I have a feeling our path goes round that way. I'm just going to check the map so that we don't walk across anywhere we shouldn't. A little bar there for golfers and drinking facilities for less well-heeled golfers. What a superb view. What an absolutely stupendous view of the hills. The edge of the town of Bridport, Colmers Hill, with its little clump of trees on the top, little copse of trees on top. And West Bay town down here. You can see Windy Corner Cafe down there. Very good place for cooked breakfast. Oh, it looks like there might be a bit more down and a bit more up before we're finished. There's a valley here to traverse. So we have to go down this valley, up the hill on the other side. My knees are starting to hurt a bit now. There is a curious stillness in the air. We've got about 2 hours of sunlight left, I think, before the sun dips below the horizon. There's another one of these rather steep inclines. You're all right, aren't you? Hang on, come here, come here, come here. Good girl. It's all right for you. You've got 4 legs. Now if you want to pull me up the hill. Okay, this should be the last little bit of up. And this hill, I know I keep on saying this, when we crest this hill, I'm expecting something quite of a view. West Bay lies before us, Lime Bay over there in the distance, In fact, over there you can see some rocks sticking out into the water, and then another lot of rocks down there. That's where we went when we went to Seatown and beyond. And we went to that very unvisited bay on the end of Golden Cap. Golden Cap is the big flat one we see in the distance behind the nearer hillside, I think. And now the last bit of down this hillside. It's a shame we can't come back over on the cliff path. I can see our car from here. Well, thank you so much for joining us on this walk along West Bay Cliffs and Hive Cliffs and back along the cliff top. I hope it's been interesting. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you again soon.